Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us for today's edition to the Canadian Tree Fund webinar series. My name is Alex Martin, co-chair of the Canadian Tree Fund, and I'm pleased to be joined by Paul Johnson. Paul is the Senior Director of Urban and Community Forestry for the Sustainable Forestry Initiative. He's an ISA board-certified Master Arborist, municipal specialist, is Tree Risk Assessment qualified, and an SAF certified forester. Paul believes that trees are key to healthier, happier, safer communities. We're pleased to have him here today for his presentation on the SFI Urban and Community Forestry Sustainability Standard. Thanks for joining us, Paul, and take it away.
All right, thank you, Alex. Really appreciate the invite. Happy to be here. It really is all about making better choices for the planet. Before I get flowing into what we're here to talk about, I'd like to start with a land acknowledgement. The Sustainable Forestry Initiative's diverse team of staff and consultants live and work on the ancestral territories of many Indigenous nations, including from our office on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin people in what is now Ottawa, Ontario, and of the Nashkatonk and Piscataway peoples in present-day Washington, D.C. We are committed to building forest-focused collaborations that recognize and respect Indigenous peoples' rights, traditional knowledge, relationships with the land, enduring leadership in forest stewardship, and responsibilities to future generations. I've been with SFI for a little bit over a year and a half now, and my main role is to help integrate SFI into urban forestry. And so we've done that in a lot of ways, but I don't know how many of you are familiar with SFI, so I thought I'd go backwards a little bit before we go forwards and kind of talk about who SFI is. SFI really does believe in a world that values and benefits from sustainably managed forests, no matter where those forests lie. The trees, the air, the water, the animals, the birds, they don't recognize political boundaries. They don't know, they don't care if they're in an urban setting, a peri-urban setting, or a rural setting. It is a continuum from that really preserved wild land out in the middle of nowhere all the way through into downtown Toronto, downtown Vancouver. And so we need to be able to work in that same vein. But we do this with others. And so it's always about advancing sustainability through forest-focused collaborations. And you'll see as we go through this that there's a lot of collaborating and partnering that's going on throughout this. SFI is led by a board of directors that is made up of three pillars: economic, environmental, and social. You'll see some of the organizations who serve on the board currently. I point out the board because the standard ultimately is a consensus document developed by urban and community forestry as a sector, but ultimately the board will be the ones that early next year say yay or nay on if the standard's ready to, and is launched into the wild. SFI works through four primary pillars. We have the standards pillar, where I'm based, where we've done forest management standard, fiber sourcing, those kinds of things for over 25 years now. We have the conservation pillar, which is really about advancing conservation initiatives and helping to kind of figure out what the impact has been of forest certification over the last 2+ decades. Then hopefully many of you know about our education pillar, Project Learning Tree Canada. We also have an extensive green jobs program funded by the Canadian government, where we are able to help people that are under 30, legally allowed to work in Canada, to be placed into green jobs. And there are some funds available to support that. So if you're interested in that, reach out. I'll make sure and connect you with the right people. And then we have our community pillar, which is all about building the SFI community, the network that makes all of these things work so well. We currently have 3 certifications. We have the traditional forest management standard, We have the fiber sourcing standard, and then we have a chain of custody standard. Our standards are all updated every 5 years. So we just launched here in 2022 the latest iteration of each of these 3 standards. And next year we will be adding the urban and community forests standard. SFI does have pretty good local and international recognition. We are part of PEFC, the Program for the Endorsement of Forest Certification, and we represent about 35% of certified forests worldwide. I'm going through some of this background because I think it will help you see why I made the change that I made a year and a half ago. We do this through lots of collaboration, as I already mentioned, including some of the organizations that you're probably familiar with on the slide here. You may know a similar scheme. FSC and SFI are 2 of the largest players in forest certification. And here's one of the real reasons why I decided that helping to integrate SFI into urban and community forestry, helping to foster the creation of a urban forest standard and the certification program that will come with it. Never before in the 40+ years that we've been doing urban forestry, really as urban forestry, have we had a great standard to work to. In tree care, we have the A300 tree care standards. There's lots of different standards out there, but urban forestry's never really had one. And not only that, but we've never had a third party verified. So each of our certified organizations, it's not SFI that actually grants that certification. These accreditation bodies are the ones that go out, review the program, see that people are actually doing the work that they say that they're doing and doing it to a standard, and then presenting or providing them with that certification. And that third party verification, I think, is going to be absolutely vital as we are looking at the many ways that urban forests can have such a big impact on the many challenges that we face, including human health and climate change, just to highlight a couple of those. The other reason is SFI has a very brand. People know us, they trust us. As you see here, not only do we have millennials that think that forest certification is a positive influence, over half of US consumers recognize the SFI logo, but the other part of that is the SFI network itself. All of those organizations out there that utilize sustainable fiber, that are making and growing the tree, or growing the trees and making the things that we use that come from trees. 25% of Fortune 100 companies are part of that network, which is going to give us the ability to approach the conversation of urban forestry in a little bit different way, I think. Many of those organizations that are already using SFI certified fiber understand the value of forest certification, of the brand, the label, and they are going to be able to talk to the leadership in their communities and be able to encourage them to utilize a scheme that has worked really well for them as a chief sustainability officer or a CEO of their organization. And so those mayors, those council people are probably going to listen to some of this network in a different way than they listen to many of us that are really probably working more ground up than top down, and working with the people that are actually out there running the chainsaws, chippers, dragging the brush, talking to the people that are the city foresters, the urban foresters, the arborists that are often enacting these things. And so I think it's going to be a kind of a unique opportunity for us to have conversations about urban forestry with potentially a different network than we've had before. So that leads us to what you're all here to talk about today, which is the new SFI Urban and Community Forest Sustainability Standard. SFI does things with others. We didn't want to come in and try to shoehorn ourselves into a sector like urban forestry without being welcomed in. And so this works from a couple of ways, but you'll see from this list that Tree Canada, Arbor Day Foundation, American Forest, SMA, ISA are all partners in the creation of the Urban and Community Forest Sustainability Standard. It really is a sector developed credential. We're a nonprofit. This isn't any one government coming in and saying, yes, we should do this. It's us going, we really need to do this. And it all came up a couple of years ago during a conversation as they were looking at revising the other standards. The question was asked, well, why doesn't SFI have an urban forest standard? SFI being SFI, they put together a task group. Peter Dunker, many of you know, Katie Fernholtz were the two co-chairs of that group, and they did some pretty extensive review of, is there anything out there like this? And no, there's really not. The other schemes aren't necessarily interested in working within the urban space. And so they then did a survey of urban and community forestry as a sector, and over 600 people replied to that survey. And shockingly, 90% said yes or yes, yes. Only 1% of the survey respondents said no. And if you can imagine, those of you that do any kind of survey work, I could ask you if the sky was blue today, and more than 1% of you would say no. It's either cloudy or it's this, or it wasn't a specific enough type of blue. And so this was a resounding support from the sector saying, yes, SFI, please come in and bring what you do well and combine it with what we do well, and let's see how far we can take this. So we have, and we've got this really great group that has been working on it for about a year and a half now. I know those of you, if any of you are on the webinar today, it's taking just a little bit longer than we had really hoped, but not any longer than we expected. And you'll see that we've got people from the Urban Wood Network, because we are talking about urban wood utilization. We've got the municipal arborists. We've got the European urban forestry folks involved, USDA Forest Service. We've got Nature Conservancy Canada. We've got the Canadian Forest Service. So we've got a wide range and as diverse a group helping to create the standard as possible. And not only was it diverse from the perspective of their their fields of practice. So we have utility foresters, we have municipal foresters, we have conservationists, we have nonprofits that work within the realm of tree planting, the whole range, Tree Canada. We also made sure that we had good geographic diversity. So we've got people from not only the US and Canada and Europe, but also within that range. We've got West Coast, East Coast, Central, to make sure that we've got good diversity there and diversity of gender, race, as much diversity as we could put together in a group that was at a manageable size. My original plan was, oh, let's have 13 to 15 people because that's usually best practice for any kind of group activity. We just couldn't get the diversity that we needed there. So it's grown to a group of over 20, but it's been a wonderful process. And I have to give each of those individuals a big thank you for the work that they've done during this time. So who can utilize the standard? Who's it for? The standard is for anyone that owns, manages, or has responsibility for trees. So that could be government groups, indigenous peoples, that could be non-government organizations. Maybe there is a nonprofit tree group in your area that is responsible for significant amounts of the urban forest. They could get certified. community groups, if there's a homeowners association that does a really good job of managing their urban forest, why wouldn't we recognize them? And then the other part is the healthcare facilities, educational facilities. We've got several universities that are already expressing interest in becoming certified urban forests. And then organizations. If there is a Google or an Apple or somebody out there that does a really good job of managing their piece of the urban forest, why wouldn't we allow them to be recognized? We are trying to draw as few artificial lines as possible. And so we are not saying that you have to have X number of hectares or X number of trees to be able to utilize the standard and to get certified to it. We do recognize that there will be market forces at work, and there will be expenses to not only managing the program, but also being able to prove that you are doing what you say that you're going to do. Because it is third-party verified, there will be a review and audit process, so there'll be some expenses there. So I don't expect a lot of single-family residential properties that will want to be certified urban forests, but they could be. And I don't want to tell them no. If we were to say, okay, you have to have at least 20 trees to be a certified urban forest, and somebody came to me with 19 trees and said, why can't I be? I don't think I've got a good answer other than that's where we drew the line. And so we're trying not to draw the line so that it's up to each of you to decide, how does this best apply to you? Anytime you do something like this, you really have to start off with the why. I'm not always a very linear thinker. And so I often want to delve right into, okay, well, let's talk about this objective and this objective. But the task group was really good about saying, Paul, slow down. Let's pull back just a little bit, and let's talk about the why of urban forests and urban forest standards. And that's where we came up with this list of really great principles. I think that in education and research, we always talk about, you'll be lucky if people remember 1 to 3 things that you say. And so you try to distill things down as much as possible. We were hoping for 3, but really kind of are here at 5. But urban forests and trees are vital for community well-being, health, resilience, and sustainability. That's the why. Why of trees where we live, work, and play. Why a standard? Well, trees need proper care and management to maximize benefits and minimize risks. Tree people often spend a lot of time talking about how great trees are. But when you get a hurricane like they did in PEI, you start to see that there are potential negatives with trees also. As one of my predecessors said, what grows up will fall down. And so we have to recognize that there are risks. And therefore, we want to make sure that we are managing to reduce or minimize those risks as part of a full circle or a full cycle management of the urban forest. Urban forests and trees require the understanding and awareness and participation of people to thrive in our communities. You often get those conversations of, oh, well, trees in the forest grow just fine. They don't need to be pruned, or they don't need to be fertilized. And yes, but they also don't have people that are walking under them, driving under them, living under them. And therefore, what really sets the urban forest apart from a traditional forest, maybe other than the products that you're managing for, are the preponderance of us people. And so that's a vital part of what we're working with. Urban forests and trees and their benefits should be accessible and available to all. The idea of equity and access is vital for our urban forests and to us being able to maximize the benefits that we get from them. And finally, urban forests and trees are nature-based solutions to the many challenges that we face, and they are green infrastructure. They should be managed in our communities because of how important they are and the amazing things that they do for us. From there, we moved into coming up with what are the objectives, what are the things that we really have to do in a full cycle urban forest to make sure that we have that sustainability. And sustainability means that we are able to benefit from them basically in perpetuity. The old idea of you're not just managing for right now or the next generation, but you're managing for many generations down the line. We did that through a number of objectives. These are numbered so that you can refer to them. They are not numbered because they are ordinal. So it's not like you have to do objective 1 before you do objective 7. Many of us may enter or be doing many of these already, but we did order them somewhat from a communication standpoint of community and people, human health, biodiversity, some of those things that are really, really important. And from a communication standpoint, those of you that are in urban forestry may not even be satisfied with just this list. You actually want to see the descriptions of the objectives. Well, there's a handout that you can download that has that. But that may not even be enough. You may want to look at the performance measures and the indicators that we have for each of those. Well, that's the full standard, which is also available for you to download. But we know that there are a lot of decision makers out there that are really, really busy. Urban forestry is not their area of specialty, but they may be interested and they're likely to read the principles. So that's why we put so much effort into those 5 whys. So, okay, I like these principles. Then maybe we'll look at the titles of the objectives. Oh, community and people. I'm a city manager. I really care about the people in my community, so that's important. We just went through a global pandemic, so human health is on everybody's mind. Biodiversity, climate, all of these things are right up there in those objectives so that people will pay attention and hopefully become interested enough to either delve deeper themselves or task it to somebody who has that area of specialty and can look at it a little bit more closely. As you delve in and start to look more closely, you'll see all of the SFI standards are designed kind of the same way. So you've got the objective title, you've got the description of the objective, then you have the performance measure, and then under the performance measure, you have the indicators. This is a standard. And so to fully meet the standard, you need to meet each of the indicators that apply in your situation. We have a standard on special sites and natural areas. Well, if your piece of the urban forest doesn't include a natural area, then you don't have to meet those indicators because they do not apply. But if you do have a natural area within that scope, then you have to make sure that you meet all of those also. And so each of the objectives is broken up, and we have performance measures such as the organization will broaden public engagement. And then you have a series of indicators that give a little bit more direction on what that end state is that we would like to see. Then we move into human health as the second objective, organized the same way. In addition to the standard itself, we are in the process of developing a guidance document. The first draft of the guidance document came out with the second draft over the summer for public comment. Not every single performance measure or indicator currently has guidance, but we are working towards that. But that guidance gives you a little bit more, if you're familiar with the parlance of the A300 tree care standards of shall and should. The SFI standard are all of the shalls. You must do all of these. And then in the guidance, we give you recommendations on, well, and you should do this, or you could do that. So we provide either additional clarification or examples of others that are doing something similar that would count in that area, or any tools that exist out there. And so when you talk about objective 1 and you talk about equity, then we utilize the American Forest Tree Equity Score tool as an example. It's not the way you have to do it. It's a way that you could do it. In addition, because even though most of us speak the same language in terms of English, we speak it very differently. And it's not just a north-south of the US-Canada border. It's within Canada, it's within the United States. I'm based out of Austin, Texas, and often our English is significantly different than the English of somebody in Toronto or Vancouver. And so we've tried to create a good set of definitions of those terms that need to be defined. And we've gotten a lot of that feedback through the public comment periods that we've had. I'm going to go back for just a minute. You'll see that we have italicized the words in the standard that are defined in the glossary. And in some cases, it seems like almost every other word is italicized. And that's because we're trying to make sure that everybody can read this in the same way. And so just a kind of a formatting choice at this point. In addition, we are trying to make sure that what we are doing coordinates with other programs. So if you or an organization that you work with is paying attention to the UN Sustainable Development Goals and maybe have some targets in there that you are trying to help your organization reach, we will be able to correlate how the urban forest standard connects to the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. If you are a Tree City of the World or a Tree City USA, then we are going to be able to help you see how that existing program connects to our standard. And the goal is to have a tool when you apply for certification or to prepare for certification, that you'll be able to say, yes, I'm a Tree City of the World, and it will automatically populate those indicators that we know you meet because you are a Tree City of the World. And so there's lots of programs out there. There's biodiversity programs, sustainability programs. And so we're working to bring as many of those online to help people out. Because one of the biggest challenges here is that urban and community forestry is a complex issue. So you have complicated and you have complex. Rocket science is complicated. Figuring out how much thrust you need to have this size rocket be able to break through the atmosphere, those kinds of things are complicated. But once you figure it out, you can reproduce that over and over and over again. Urban forestry is much more complex than that. We're dealing with multiple species, not just Homo sapiens and trees, but within trees themselves, you've got all the different species that we're dealing with. And even on an individual level, you can draw a CAD program of a rocket and put it through all sorts of simulations, and every single one that you produce built to those specifications are going to react the same way. We have a hard enough time just modeling how one individual of a tree is going to react to wind from one or two directions, much less how it's going to go overall. And so because it is complex, the standard's not short. It is a full cycle standard. It is what we as a sector are coming up to say, this is what we need to be able to say we have sustainable urban forests. But we're working on some ways to be able to help organizations show that they have adopted the standard, that they are working to it, so that it's not just a binary, are you certified or are you not? There's actually going to be a process of, yes, we have adopted the standard and we meet Objective 1, community and people. We may not have met Objective 7 yet, but we are working towards that. I think it's going to be pretty interesting for organizations to be able to do some of these things. If any of you are particularly interested in this, or your organization might be interested, I'm still working with some organizations to pilot the standard. During the 2 public comment periods, people have told us what they thought about individual indicators, performance measures. But now we're asking organizations to actually say, okay, here is a piece of the urban forest that I would like to apply the standard to. And through a series of surveys, you can go, yes, we feel like we meet the standard, or no, we don't. If we feel like we meet it, here's how we would show it. If we don't feel like we meet it, why not? Or what would it take to get there? So that we have an idea of, are there some things that we are currently asking for that might just be a little bit too much at this point in time? Because, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, SFI does update our standards every 5 years. So this first edition doesn't have to have everything. In order for the program to be sustainable, it has to be accessible. There have to be organizations that say, yes, this is important. We are going to invest into working to the standard and achieving certification. And so finding that balance between achievable and accessible is pretty important. And one of the reasons why I'm here with you is hopefully we'll have a chance to have some Q&A and some discussion as you can share. But you can see we've got a number of organizations that are actively testing. I need to update the slide. I've got a healthcare facility that's doing the same. It's going to be really interesting to be able to take what the sectors come up with and then apply some real world application to it before it goes live next year. So if any of you are interested in taking that next step and doing some actual piloting, reach out to me. Our email addresses are very easy, firstname.lastname@forest.org. Love the fact that we were able to get that for our domain and email address, but it's paul.johnson@forest.org, and we'd be happy to have a few more, particularly some smaller organizations across Canada would be great to test it and see where are we in it being something that is scalable for small and large organizations. All right, so now we have a chance for some Q&A, some discussion. And Alex, I will take a second and let you see if there's anything to discuss specifically.
Sounds good. Thanks, Paul. If folks are interested in asking any questions on your viewing panel, you'll see a chat function that there's both a chat and a question box, and feel free to submit in either. A question for you, Paul. Has a lot of the uptake and interest been from larger cities or smaller municipalities?
I would say it's pretty evenly split. The interest is broad. The first draft was extremely extensive. Between the first draft and the second draft, we were able to refine it by about 25%. So it is a much more accessible standard now than it started out with. So if any of you haven't looked at it lately, encourage you to do so. My goal is to further refine it with the task group between now and the end of the year. And so it should be even a little bit more refined, a little more condensed than it is now. But I've got organizations like Wake Forest in North Carolina, which is a fairly small community, that think they're basically already there. And so they are looking at doing a pilot for us just to see what works and what doesn't work for that smaller organization. And all of it's doable. Like anything, there will be some time and or money needed to be invested to talk about things like carbon that maybe your organization hasn't considered before. Also, I've talked to some people that are going out for bids for new forest management plans or master plans, those kinds of things, and are potentially utilizing the standard as somewhat of the format of, okay, here are the topics that we want to make sure that we're covering during our planning sessions. And so I think that we want to make sure that we keep in mind that certification is the goal, because that's the way that you prove that you're doing what you're doing. But the standard and certification, while intricately connected, you don't have to get certified to adopt the standard and work to the standard. If you're a smaller organization and you think, oh, we're never going to be able to do all of this, but we really like objectives 5, 7, and 9, then adopt those. You can put that into policy, you can put that into procedure, and it still gives you a roadmap on how to get where you want to be, rather than just what many of us have done for decades, which is read Richard Harris's book on urban forestry, or take a look at the ISA's Municipal Specialist Study Guide, and try to put together a way of managing your urban forest. This gives us a little bit more of that roadmap or recipe of how to get from where you are to where you want to be.
As a component of that, do you see the standard as encouraging or commanding a multidisciplinary approach, where we start to see urban foresters working alongside the urban planners to make sure that we're functionally meeting and preparing into the future for meeting a lot of these standards, or at least acting in a supportive manner so that we can pursue these standards or certification in the future?
Yes, absolutely. And if you haven't had the pleasure of working with a planner, I highly encourage it. Out of most of the municipal structure, I honestly think planners are probably one of our best collaborators, because they often think about things on the same time scale that we need to think about things. Trees that you plant now are not typically giving us a lot of their benefits until much further down the line, decades even. And planners are often looking at things in that same way of, okay, if we do this now, what is that going to mean in this community in 50 years? And so I think there's some real encouragement of that through the standard. One of the comments that we've gotten on several parts of it is, this is outside of the scope of urban forestry in my organization. And the answer is yes. The urban forest is not limited to just one scope. So if you're in the department that manages the street trees, but you're not in the department that manages the park trees, well, how do you do that? Well, within the scope of this standard, you could just want to certify all of your street trees, or you could want to just certify your park as an urban forest, or probably you should try to bring those together and certify your urban forest, and it requires that collaboration happens, even in some of those organizations that I've heard of, where sometimes one department doesn't really work well with another department. We can accept that, or we can say, to get the most out of what we're doing, maybe we've got to figure out ways to get beyond those historic challenges and really focus on improving into the future.
On a related note about street versus park certification, the focusing, Daniel asks the question that many cities have more than one woodlot or more than one kind of central forested area. Could certification be pursued for the entire community, or kind of on this basis of park by park by park, considering that some of those parks, some of those woodlands might be managed in a more active way than others?
Yes. I think that the flexibility is built in for both. If you had one crown jewel park in your system and you thought that was the fastest route to certification and you only wanted to certify that one part, you could do that. Just like there are traditional forests out there that a single owner may own many parcels of the forest, and they may apply it to only a part of that are the forest that they own, or they may apply it to all of them. Active management often depends upon what the goal is for that piece. So if you have a more natural area and you're not doing a lot of what most people call active management in terms of going in and pruning and those kinds of things, but that you are regularly monitoring it, maybe you're trying to control invasive species or those kinds of things, that also counts because it's based upon what that local goal is for each of those parcels.
On a quite related question from Bridget, would you be able to expand on how some of those performance indicators are decided upon, and the performance indicators especially related to human health and well-being objectives?
All right. I do not have in this presentation all of them. I will share a slide at the end that has links to, on our website, I've got a 90-minute presentation just on objectives 1 through 7, and then another 90-minute presentation on objectives 8 through 16, and go through every single performance measure, every indicator, and kind of talk about the why and the how for those. But for this, the process has very much been, okay, we came up with what the objective was, spent a lot of time. If you can imagine editing a document with 20 different people working on it, each one of these words has been selected very specifically. Doesn't mean that it's always the best word, particularly for your locality, but it has been very intentional. And then we broke up into subgroups. So we had a champion that kind of led the subgroup, and then those interested subject matter experts that were smaller groups that determined what they wanted to put forth as the performance measures and the indicators for each individual objective. We then went through the first public comment period. We took all of those comments. Some of them we made modifications because of. Others we considered the comment, but then decided to keep the standard the way that it was. And then we did that again over this summer, and are currently in the process of going through all of those comments and making sure that we're addressing everyone and making any changes that we need. In this case, the performance measure is that the organization includes human health and well-being in assessment, planning, and management efforts. This is one that's a little bit tough because there are a few that are probably more topic-oriented, human health, biodiversity, climate smart, that could be dealt with individually in the planning and assessment, in the management, et cetera, objectives. But because of what we're all going through, there are some topics like human health that are just so important that they kind of rise to that level of an objective. And so you get what seems like a little bit of repetition periodically throughout the standard. But again, with that communication lens on, often repetition is important because that's how you get people to actually pay attention to something. There's research out there that shows that you've got to be in front of people some 7 or 8 times before they really recognize you, know who you are, and start to care. So we do the same thing here. Human health is one of those areas that rose as such an important topic area that it became its own objective. And we want to make sure that the organization can talk about or identify how human health and well-being are addressed in their assessments and strategies. We use the word strategies throughout. You'll see that it is defined rather than requiring written plans, because often written plans are just that. They are written, they're put on a shelf, and then we drag them out when we've got to show somebody that we have a plan. But strategies are a little bit more active. A written plan may be a part of your strategy, and then you show how that also is implemented. We want to make sure that human health is considered in that planning, that assessment, that strategy. And so there are some things like human health that if your organization hasn't put the same emphasis on it over the last 5 years that kind of the sector itself has, you may have to do a little bit of work before you can meet each of those indicators. But this one, I think, would be really as simple as potentially having a heat zone assessment, and your planting plan is taking into account where the greatest need is because of the connection between heat and human health. Those kinds of things that would be kind of vital to making sure that you're addressing those locally important areas where trees can be an assistance.
Isaac asks if there's, once you pursue the certification, the standard, and you get certified, if there's any teeth, so to speak, for folks that kind of begin to renege on those standards or don't continue to hit the marks.
Great question. Yes. All of the other SFI standards are an annual certification, and so you have to do it every year. We have had some feedback where that's a concern potentially in urban forests, and so we're considering maybe making it an every other year. But yes, not only do you have to say that you're going to do it, actually do it, prove that you're doing it, you have to continue to do that over time. And so you will lose that certification if you aren't continuing to do what you say you're going to do.
What do you think is the role of consulting firms or contractors in coming in and aiding municipalities in achieving these standards?
I think that this is going to open up a lot of new opportunities that we haven't had before. There are going to be organizations that have very high-performing urban forestry programs that are probably doing most, if not all of this already, but there's going to be even more that are doing pieces of it, but don't have the entire thing. And so you could be a organization, a consultant or a consultancy that specializes on human health or climate or biodiversity, and there will be a role for you. Not only that, but there are also going to be opportunities for subject matter experts to work with the auditors. And so they are often going to need urban forestry expertise to come in and be able to help evaluate these programs. And so there's a lot of consulting arborists and foresters, I think, there are going to be able to utilize this to potentially open up new business opportunities for them. And I think that there's going to be a lot of coaching opportunities where we are going to be able to grow our network, whether it's through the ISA chapters or other networks, of being able to say, okay, we've got X number of communities in our area that are working towards this SFI certification, and they're a little bit challenged with this objective. What can we, as either an organization or as an individual or consultancy, do to help many of them? And so I can totally see opportunities for tracks in future conferences, future webinars, very specifically based on certain topics or objectives within the standard.
What would a suitable package look like for a municipality that's preparing to apply or send in for this certification?
All right, so we don't have the final tool yet. As I said, I'm hoping that it is a responsive tool that recognizes those existing credentials that you have within your organization and can auto-populate some things. But it's basically going to be an interview / survey type tool where you're going to be able to say, okay, here's who we are. Here is the description of our urban forest, hopefully even be able to upload CAD files or GPS coordinates, those kinds of things to give a picture of what it is specifically that you are looking to have certified, fill out the information, and then have it reviewed. And then ultimately, you'll hire one of the accreditation firms. They'll come out, they'll review your program and ultimately say, yes, you meet the standards, or no, you don't. But what we are working on between that, okay, we haven't even started yet, to we are now certified, is the potential for an electronic badging program. A lot of universities are starting to use this in the educational field, but we want to be able to recognize when somebody officially adopts the standard, they will get recognized for that. And then as they achieve all of the indicators and performance measures for an objective, they will get recognized for that. So that over time, as their program continues to grow and improve, they are going to be able to show progress towards that point in time where they are ready to become certified. And I think it's going to give quite a bit of flexibility and hopefully make it a very relevant program and standard for organizations of all sizes. Maybe we're never in somewhere in the south of the US, politically never going to be able to talk about climate smart management. But all the rest of it is really, really valuable for us. So we are going to adopt it. We're going to work towards it. We may not ever achieve that certification because we can't talk about climate as climate. Hopefully this will change, but there are some areas still where politically climate change and climate smart this or that isn't politically feasible. And so we're wanting to make sure that it's accessible for them also.
One last question here in our chat is, who is undertaking the accreditation in terms of urban forestry firms?
We are still working on that. ANAB, many of you probably know ANSI potentially from the A300 tree care standards in the US. Well, ANAB is their now kind of umbrella organization. The two of them came together a few years ago, and it was ANAB-ANSI, American National Standards Institute. I always forget what ANAB stands for, but they are absolutely looking at it. We are right now in the process of reaching out to the existing accreditation firms, but also open to the idea of new. If we have other groups within our sector that are already doing similar work, and we have auditors that kind of know the auditing process, open to that also. And if you have some ideas there, reach out to me. I'd be absolutely interested to hear other organizations that might be able to help with that part of the process.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Paul. That brings us to the end of the questions in the chat. And
right.
With 2 minutes, 2 minutes to spare. So with that, I'll thank you very much for coming, Paul, and for all the attendees who joined us today. As always, the Canadian Tree Fund operates off of donations, where we provide research grants to folks doing research that's related to urban forestry and arboriculture in Canada, and also grants that help support young up-and-coming arborists that are making their way through education, whether that's to pursue arboriculture, to pursue urban forestry. In the chat, I've just sent the donation page for our website. We appreciate any donation that you can. We're approaching tax season, and so any donation over $20 receives a tax receipt. So with that, again, thank you so much, Paul, for coming out and teaching all of us more about the SFI standard. And thanks for everyone who attended today.
Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, everyone.